All right, let's jump into Miami Ole Miss. Miami and Ole Miss here, two unlikely of sorts teams that are in the college football playoff semifinals. I think a lot of people early in the year would have had obviously Miami in this situation. A lot of updated brackets, maybe say after September, certainly had the Hurricanes in this type of a scenario, but they did have that slump, losing to Louisville, losing to SMU, but they figured it out. Mario Cristobal and that staff got that roster rolling in the right direction, and we see what has now played out. Ole Miss, meanwhile, dealt with and is dealing with one of the most incredible stories you've ever really watched unfold in the college football landscape, especially in terms of coaching carousel moves. I put the whole Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss, LSU, and even Florida kind of out there saga right up there with, man, I remember when Cam Newton dealt with the eligibility issues. Obviously, you look back on like a Bobby Petrino in Arkansas. There's all sorts of different moments in time around college football that I feel like you know where you were when things happened and watch the saga play out. And feel free to chime in the comments. I'm sure there's more outstanding ones, but those are some of the ones that come to mind for me. And meanwhile, this Ole Miss team just kept on winning. They put their heads down and they wanted to prove the country wrong. They wanted to prove Lane Kiffin wrong as far as why he should leave Ole Miss and leave Oxford and not pursue a national championship there when maybe he does have a national championship team that he has built for these Ole Miss Rebels that are looking to advance to that national championship game with a win over Miami. Miami, meanwhile, has been a program that has shown when you stay patient in today's day and age of college football, when you stay on track with somebody who clearly gets it and cares. And we talked about this on Monday with Georgia Tech bringing in somebody who bleeds for Georgia Tech and they're a new offensive coordinator, Mario Cristobal. It doesn't get more Miami than that in a sense. I mean, you could hire Michael Irvin, you could hire Ray Lewis, but as far as somebody with a plan who can get it done and bleed for the U, it's Mario Cristobal. And he has done a tremendous job recruiting, a tremendous job adjusting and tweaking all of the things that you need to in today's day and age of college football to figure things out. And even did so, whatever it was, during the course of this season to get this team back on track because past Miami teams had cratered, past Miami teams had dealt themselves that knockout blow, like last year's team losing to Syracuse and missing out on an ACC championship game. Now Miami playing for a spot in the national championship because Mario Cristobal was able to finally press those right buttons for the Hurricanes in the course of the regular season. And once they got to the playoffs, they were able to play up to their competition level and stand out and continue to show why that roster that we saw in September that grabbed those wins, that was able to knock off a Notre Dame and beat a Florida and beat a pesky USF team, they were able to play this style of football and play this level of football that allows them to get to this point. And with Miami, they come into this game as a team that looks like on paper can slow Ole Miss down. They really hold up well as far as the matchups go. When you look at these two teams and what they bring to the table, Miami allowing 4.4 yards per play, Ole Miss 5.3. That'll be a tough defensive challenge for Ole Miss with Trinidad Chambliss at quarterback to overcome. Opponents, have come into Miami's world as far as defense goes and found out that they have the trenches. And it's not just a Reuben Bain. It's an Akeem Mesidor. It's Moton. It's Justin Scott. It's all of these guys that have been recruited and developed and brought in to make these difference-making plays. And that's before you get to the back end, and we saw what Keontae Scott can bring from a game-changing playmaking perspective. And that's what these teams in the college football playoff have found out about Ole Miss. They found out, when a Texas A&M or an Ohio State is going up against Miami for some of these recruits that are playing on the other side of them now and transfers, they found out, wow, look at what they put together and look at what it looks like now. And then you've got Corey Hetherman pulling the strings behind the curtain, being able to make things work defensively. And that's going to be a huge challenge for Charlie Weiss Jr., the play caller for Ole Miss, and a team that, I'm very familiar with just watching them up close this season. Trinidad Chambliss came in for Austin Simmons once he got injured earlier this year and just lit it up. And I was not necessarily high on that happening. That's a huge jump from D2 Ferris State, where he had won a national championship, to then jumping up to the SEC and playing in front of more fans in one single game than he had his entire career at Ferris State, you could argue. That is such a big jump, but Trinidad has such a great maturity about him and a great way about him. When you watch him do interviews or you watch him on the field having fun, that's who he is. He's almost the anti Carson Beck. Carson Beck out there, and you see him get demonstrative at times when things go wrong, or you see him look kind of, ticked off, kind of not even almost happy at times when things are going on in the game. I watched this post game interview after Ohio State, and you're like, okay, you just advanced to the semifinals of the college football playoff. Get a little happier there, but it's just two different guys and two different ways that they go about things. And this is all fun and new for Trinidad Chambliss in a sense at this level. Carson Beck has been here before. He has been to this level and closing in on this mountaintop. And that is the difference between these two. And I don't know if it's going to be an X factor. I think Trinidad Chambliss has shown he can be nails when Ole Miss has certainly needed it. They were able to waltz by Tulane earlier in this playoff, but then they get to Georgia and they get their chance to knock off the Bulldogs. And boy, they almost let it slip away again, but he was able to come up with the game-changing plays to get that done. So when I look at this matchup between Miami and Ole Miss, we talked about some of the quarterback play there, especially Trinidad and what he's going to bring. He's going to bring an ability to escape. He's going to bring an ability to extend plays. How does Miami defend that? Because Marcel Reed could have moved around a little bit. Julian saying not really as much. But this Trinidad, ability that he has to make special game-changing plays, I don't know what that's going to look like in the course of this game. I really don't know, because you have Akeem Mesidor, you have Ruben Bain, you have a Keontae Scott even who can kind of be in the box and kind of watching. You have Wesley Bissaint, and you have that talented group of linebackers for Miami as well that can make plays and has been physical and has been able to impose their will. How does that impact how they rush the passer? How does that impact how they get after a Trinidad Chambliss? Because if you have a quarterback who can extend plays, you have somebody that puts that extra level of stress on your defense. What does Corey Hetherman do to attack that and not necessarily sit back and let it happen to you? Because I do think with the amount of talent Miami does have in their secondary, they need to find a way to force Trinidad Chambliss's hand into throwing some interceptions. And he's not allergic to making poor decisions at times. At times, he's been very, very good. But there have been teams that have been able to do that and make things difficult on him at times. I think when you look back on the season, I'd be interested to see how much Miami will watch that LSU game, which was a really terrific football game. But an LSU team that couldn't get anything going offensively was still able to play some really quality defense against Ole Miss. Ole Miss ultimately pulls away. They win that game. But there were moments in that game where you were watching Trinidad Chambliss and you were like, oof, okay, little flustered. It was kind of his first big game as a starter at Ole Miss. And now he's seasoned. Now he's, got that experience under his belt in the college football playoff. But what LSU was able to do against Ole Miss, is that how Miami kind of attacks it? Because that LSU defense was really good this year for the most part. So something to keep an eye on there. How does Miami contain Trinidad Chambliss as far as what he does, as far as extending plays? How much does that change how Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor and all of those guys pursue him and get after him, play in, play out? That's one piece when you're looking at Miami matching up to this Ole Miss offense. The main piece, though, how does Miami contain Ole Miss running back Keywan Lacey, one of the best running backs in the country? I think what he's done behind an offensive line that entered the season being a group that was very questionable. It was the group that Ole Miss fans were sitting back and saying, okay, they're banged up in fall camp. When are we going to get a look at the fully healthy group? And man, they were able to do a really good job throughout this season, thanks in part to Trinidad Chambliss and his ability, as well as Keywan Lacey and his ability to pick up yards after contact. And Keywan Lacey ends up being a Doak Walker finalist. I mean, my pick for the number one running back in the country. I think you've got to look at what he did for most every game this year and respect what he did. And he was just incredible at producing yards after contact. He's a really special back who just agreed to returning to Ole Miss for next season. When you see him and you watch him run, Miami's motor, Miami's ability to gang tackle, that is going to be critical. And this is very obvious. I I think Miami, if they can shut down Keywan Lacey, can win this game and maybe win it by double digits. That's just when you look at being able to stop a Trinidad Chambliss, if he's one dimensional and if that offense is one dimensional, that is going to be very interesting to watch.